I sort of owe the creators of the Tomorrowverse an apology. Let me explain. In previous reviews that I've done of Tomorrowverse films, one of my main criticisms has been that the universe is way too rushed. Extremely important relationships and plots just happen off screen or are established with zero build up. When watching the Tomorrowverse films in order, you often feel like you're missing 5 establishing movies that were made and then never released in between each new film and the previous one. I've called out the Tomorrowverse's creators for that major misstep, and it is still a major problem with the Tomorrowverse. That and the lackluster writing on almost all of these films. I've also said in at least one prior video that I was not excited to see Justice League Crisis on Infinite Earths when it came out, in part because the Tomorrowverse's rushed nature meant that there hadn't been an appropriate amount of in-universe build-up to an event like Crisis. But I've just recently become aware of an interview that several Tomorrowverse creatives did for another YouTube channel, Fanboy Nation, in which they revealed that they themselves really aren't the ones most at fault for how rushed and undercooked the Tomorrowverse is. Earlier this month, executive producer Butch Lukic, producer and writer Jim Krieg, and director Jeff Wamister, while speaking with a Fanboy Nation interviewer, explained that their original pitch to Warner Brothers Animation's higher-ups was for a series of 20 to 24 DC animated films that would end with a possible 5-part adaptation of Crisis on Infinite Earths, but that they were told by those executives, those higher-ups, that they'd only be allowed to do 3 films before Crisis. They managed to negotiate up until they were eventually allowed to do 10 films, including the 3-part Crisis event, but they were told in no uncertain terms that 10 films would be the limit, and they essentially took what they could get and made the Tomorrowverse the way that it was. Butch, Jim, and Jeff have told virtually that same story a few more times in other interviews that they've done while promoting Justice League Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 1, how they wanted to take their time to meticulously construct a universe of movies that would at least be as numerous as those in the DC animated movie universe that started with Justice League War and ended with Justice League Dark Apocalypse War. How they were told by studio executives that Warner Brothers Animation didn't want to do another massive universe of interconnected films and wanted to do at most 10 movies before starting a new shared animated universe with fresh producers. It's important to note that this decision had nothing to do with James Gunn's takeover, but was entirely about how Warner Brothers Animation executives didn't want to spend too long in one animated movie universe before moving on. In fact, in one interview, Butch Lukic himself said that he initially didn't even want to do Crisis at the end of his 10-movie run because he didn't feel like 10 movies would be enough to properly build up to and then tell Crisis. And he said that he only did it because he was ordered to do it by the studio head who hired him and because he thought he'd be out of the picture when the time came to adapt Crisis for the screen. So, yeah. On the one hand, you could argue that Butch and the others could have and maybe should have just walked away and turned down the offer to make what they already knew would probably be a mediocre shared universe of animated movies. And the poor writing on most of Tomorrowverse films is definitely a problem that still lies more so with the movie's creatives than with any studio executives. But on the other hand, Butch and the others are all working entertainers, so it's hard to fault them for taking the opportunity to get stable work and to create their own shared animated movie universe based upon DC Comics properties. I honestly can't say that I would not have made the same choice. Besides which, most of the blame rests with Warner Brothers Animation executives for even putting creators up to doing a second-rate job at rushing out a shared universe just so that they could start over with something new as soon as possible. It seems like, as usual, the root reason behind less than optimal entertainment has more to do with studio interference than with poor decision making by the creators. Executives make these often confusing, often short-sighted decisions that are head-scratchers to everyone else, and in the end, the fans end up being the losers. All of which is to say that I sort of owe an apology to the creatives behind the Tomorrowverse for my criticism of the film series, because it really does look like most of the blame rests elsewhere. I don't know if those people are even listening to or following my channel right now, but if they are, there it is. I'm sorry, sort of. At any rate, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more.